All right. Good morning, everybody. We are going to be joined today by Christian Menefee, who I think is one of the most exciting political leaders in Texas right now, in the country right now, and is at the center of an incredibly important fight for the future of Texas and of America. And that is this fight for the right to vote and protecting this hard-won democracy that too many of us take for granted, and which is under attack right now in Texas and especially in Harris County, where Christian Menefee serves as the county attorney, a job that he's described as the perfect intersection between the law and public policy. And so very excited that he'll be joining us. Hope that you enjoy the conversation. We'll be looking for your questions about this fight that he's engaged in right now, or about him personally and his career, or about what the county attorney does in the state of Texas, and then again, specifically in Harris County. So right now, I'm gonna see if I can find him as a requester to join this conversation. I think, there we go. Hey, Christian.
Hey, Beto, what's going on, man?
Thanks for joining.
I'm super excited to be on. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. In my introduction right now that I was giving to the folks who follow us and join us on Instagram, I was describing you as, not to embarrass you, but as someone who I think is incredibly exciting in terms of what you're doing right now for Harris County, for Texas, but also what you represent in terms of our future in this state and in this country. You're very young. I believe you were in your early 30s when you were first elected in 2020, making you the youngest county attorney in Harris County history, the first African-American county attorney in Harris County history. And for those unfamiliar with Texas geography, Harris County is home to Houston, Texas, the most diverse city in the United States of America. More people live in Harris County than live in the entire state of Nevada. It is a huge place with an incredibly diverse population that really represents and reflects the future not only of Texas, but of America. And this is a position that you've described as critical to the future of not just the law and rule of law, but of public policy. So why don't you begin by telling us why you ran for this office in the first place, why you chose to pursue politics, and then we'll get into what you're doing in this job, and then into what you are currently fighting for right now.
Well, first of all, Beto, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I come from a two-parent household where both folks served in the armed forces. And, both my mother and my father got into the military to escape poverty. So I grew up my entire life kind of having this sense of duty for public service, where I was taught that it's not enough to sit on the sidelines and talk about the democracy that you want. You got to get in and actively be involved in protecting that democracy. And I think what really woke me up, Beto, was in 2016, after having been the first in my family to graduate college, been part of a family where I had a brother who had childhood cancer and made it through that. And we had a single income because my mom was back and forth to the hospital all the time. I graduate college, I go to law school, and I started practicing out in the private sector because, I grew up in a household where we didn't have much money, so the opportunity to make money was a big deal to me. And in 2016, I remember vividly when Donald Trump won the presidential election. I remember thinking, there's no way that it was my path to come up in that household, to learn about the protection of our democracy, to be sitting on the sidelines in one of the most pivotal moments in our country's history. So I started getting more involved, started getting involved in civic organizations and democratic clubs to do my part in shaping the democracy that I wanted to see. And that's when I learned about this office, the county attorney's office. I love being a lawyer. When I was growing up, I didn't see any lawyers. I didn't know any lawyers. So to have become a lawyer, I love doing it. And I knew that I wanted to get into public service, but I wanted to keep practicing law. So I saw this position that previously not much had been made of it, right? It's basically the civil lawyer for Harris County government, which has about 18,000 employees. And so you think of it like an in-house legal department. But what I saw at the same time, Beto, was Greg Abbott, Ken Paxton, and other Republican leaders really taking aim at Harris County, filing lawsuits, trying to undermine our elections. You even saw the president of the United States calling for an election audit right here in Harris County. And it was at that moment that I realized that we needed somebody in this role who was going to be prepared to go fight it out in the courtroom with those folks, who wasn't going to be afraid of them, who was going to call bullshit when he saw it. And that was part of the reason that I decided to jump in and run for this position. I would have never guessed that we would have so many attacks on our elections, right? I would have never guessed that we would have so many attempts to run Harris County via Republicans in Austin. And so I would have never guessed that there would have been this many fights that needed to be had. But what better time to have somebody who's prepared to stand up in the courtroom to protect our democracy, the very same thing that I saw my parents do in the armed services.
You talked about some of the attacks that Harris County is undergoing right now in terms of this democracy that you talked about that inspired you to run for office in the first place, from the former president, Donald Trump, to our current governor and lieutenant governor and attorney general, and even some local big dollar donors in Harris County who are trying to overturn the results of the last election. Before we get into the specifics and maybe even the motivation for those that I just described, for those unfamiliar with Harris County in Houston, Texas, tell us a little bit about what it's like to live there, to work there, what makes Harris County and Houston so special, and that might lead us into why it has become target number one in Texas for those trying to stop people from freely and fairly voting and deciding the outcomes of these elections.
Most folks don't know this, but Harris County is the third most populous county in the country, right? And it's huge. If Harris County were a state, it'd be the 25th most populous state, and it'd be the size of one of several states on the East Coast. It's just this huge landmass that has a ton of people. But what most people don't know is we're incredibly diverse. There's over 100 languages spoken in the Houston area. We have this incredibly diverse food scene, cultural scene, right? And it's funny because whenever I talk to my friends from law school who live in Chicago and New York and LA, they just think, oh, Christian lives in Texas, right? They don't understand that when you live in Houston, you're experiencing something different than maybe other parts of Texas would experience. But at the same time that you're having this incredible diversity in Harris County, you're having diverse leaders who are being elected, right? In 2015, we elected our second African-American mayor, Sylvester Turner. Fast forward a couple years later, you saw Rodney Ellis get elected to the Commissioner's Court. Fast forward 2 years later, you see Adrian Garcia and Lena Hidalgo get elected. And Lena's now our Chief Executive Officer for Harris County. That's a young Latina who was under the age of 30 at the time she was elected. Then 2 years later, I get elected. So we have a black person running the city, black and brown folk running the county, a black elections administrator, a black county clerk, a black county attorney. And at the same time, our viewpoints are more progressive than those folks out in Austin. So what you're seeing is this old institutional guard, politicians who are known across the nation, like Ken Paxton, who filed the lawsuit to overturn the results of the 2020 election, Dan Patrick, who's one of Donald Trump's closest allies, Greg Abbott, who's now trying to stand in to run for president himself. You're seeing these old institutional players bump up against young, diverse, progressive leadership that I would say better reflects the third largest county in the country than the folks out in Austin.
It's a reminder to me, and I hope to the folks who are watching and listening to you right now, that though we are often consumed by pointing out the failures of Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton and Dan Patrick, the current leadership in the state of Texas and the Republican majority state legislature, you, Lena Hidalgo, Rodney Ellis, Sheila Jackson Lee, who's a congresswoman for Harris County and is running for mayor right now, Andy Brown in Travis County, Clay Jenkins in Dallas. The wealth of local leadership that we have right now, I think, is this beautiful counterpoint to the very regressive, repressive, almost authoritarian leadership that we have at the top of the state, which is responsible for those currently at the top of the state for a $7.25 an hour minimum wage, the least insured state in the country, one who can't manage its power grid without killing its own citizens, a state that leads the nation in school shootings where gun violence is the leading cause of death for children and teenagers, the most repressive abortion ban in America that is not just making it harder for women to access reproductive health care, but is certainly consigning too many of them to suffering and needless death. That is not reflective of all of us. I would argue it's not reflective of the majority of us, and it's certainly not reflective of Harris County and the community that you're helping to lead right now. So tell us why you think, and then we'll get into the ways in which they're doing this, there is such a concerted, focused attack on Harris County, and specifically the people and the voters in Harris County.
After the 2020 presidential election, you saw our former president step in and say that the results weren't true, that he actually won. And what I saw was a person clamoring to hold on to power after the decision had already been made to put him out of power. But in Texas, our politicians on the Republican side who are running the state, they're trying to prevent it beforehand, right? They're trying to avoid ending up in a Donald Trump situation. And the way that they see to do that is you suppress votes in the large, Democratic, diverse areas. You undermine elected officials in the large, diverse, Democratic areas. So it's a long-term strategy to ensure that Texas continues to elect Republicans statewide, because anybody who's paying attention who looks at the demographic data knows that with the trends in demographic data, if everybody plays their cards right, Texas should be blue in the near future, right? If let's say the next decade, right? As long as Democrats continue to deliver for people, we address the tough issues, the issues that are at people's front door, we will turn blue. The Republicans see that, and they understand that there are certain counties in Texas that if you can impact elections there, you have the ability to retain power for several decades more, or maybe even several years more. And so that attention is directed to Harris County, and they do it in a few ways. They undermine the right to vote. They try to restrict voting in a way that they know will disproportionately impact Harris County. But another important way that they do it is they attack the leaders in these areas, right? And this is an old playbook, right? I mean, there are many books out there that talk about Confederates and how they're still fighting the Civil War from years ago. And one of the best known strategies is you immediately make Black and brown politicians look corrupt, right? You look for anything that's out there and you immediately try to label them corrupt for doing the same thing that other politicians do, right? You try to restrict them and then argue that they're ineffective after you've restricted them. You, in any way you can, demonize them, because in turn what you're doing is making a certain base believe that these people are not capable to be good leaders, and it allows you to retain power. I think it's a very coordinated effort, and I think it's the reason why you see these attacks only on the counties that are reliably blue, and those that are competing right now are purple, and the Republicans are trying to keep them red.
The Republican leadership, it sounds like from your description, understand what's happening presently in Texas in terms of the disconnect between public policy at a statewide level and the real values and interests and aspirations of the people of Texas at large. And specifically where you have the greatest concentration of people, which is in Harris County and Houston, Texas, there's been this concerted effort to stop people from voting, from being part of the electorate. I have reminded people that when you see lines that stretch 6-7 hours long outside of Texas Southern University, which is one of the places I last saw you before the November 22 election, that 6-hour line in part inspires, admiration from those of us who are impressed that somebody would wait or could wait 6 hours in order to cast their ballot and participate in this democracy. But that feeling should quickly be overcome with shame that we force that indignity on anyone. And when you look at the facts and see that Republicans have closed down more than 700 polling locations in Texas, more than any other state, most of them concentrated in the fastest growing Black and brown neighborhoods. When you look at our voter ID laws that again are focused on the very young, the very old, the poor, and again, communities of color across the state of Texas, a gerrymander of our congressional districts that has been described by 3 federal judges as a racial gerrymander of the state. That was the status quo before Republicans focused even harder on the constituents that you represent right now. So I'd love to transition to the degree that you can speak about this, and we'll respect the boundaries that you set because these are active cases right now. But the state legislature in this last legislative session, as they did in the prior one, tried to make it even harder for people in Harris County to vote. And so one of the things that they've tried to do is to remove local control of elections and then to allow the state potentially to take over those elections completely. The other thing that's happening, and you alluded to this earlier, is those who lost local elections in 2022 in Harris County, who happen to be Republicans, are trying to overturn those elections through the courts and the legal system. You're at the forefront of both of these fights, which again come down to whether or not the right to vote and votes already cast will be respected. Can you tell us what's happening, what your role and the role of your office is, and what we might expect to see next in these fights?
That's right. So there are two different fights that are going on. The first is 22 losing Republican candidates from the 2022 election filed election contests to overturn the results of their election. What's notable is more than 10 of these folks filed their election contest, and I'm not making this up, on January 6th, the 2-year anniversary of when a bunch of folks tried to storm the Capitol. Many of these races where these election contests have been filed are more than 10,000, 20,000 vote differentials, right? These are people who so clearly and obviously lost their races that there's no reasonable argument that they should be entitled to a new election. But they filed these lawsuits, and what they've done is they then push out a narrative to the media, right, to get them to continue to talk about elections in Harris County. So we're now in August of 2023 still talking about elections from 2022. Right now, closing arguments are going on in the first of those cases. And I have my team of lawyers are down there right now because we were really the repository for all the evidence, right? We put up, we have witnesses who were called in the case. All the documents came from the county. So we're actively watching it, and we've been involved in the process from day one. I'm hopeful that the judge in the case is going to see the facts as they are and is going to throw this out. But the real important takeaway here is not what's happening today, but what's going to happen tomorrow. This is part of the new playbook, right? You lie to win, but if you don't win, then you just try to get the results thrown out after the fact. So it is a new strategy, and they can use their mega donors to fund legal counsel to be able to continuously bring these types of cases. It's a very dangerous thing, but I'm hopeful that the court system will boot this stuff out. But the other important lawsuit that we have is the Texas legislature this last session passed a law that abolished only one office in the entire state of Texas, and that is the Harris County Elections Administrator Office. They targeted Harris County, and it will only ever apply to Harris County forever. It only abolishes that office. Thankfully, there's a provision in the Texas Constitution that says you can't pass laws that target a locality. So we filed a lawsuit to boot that law out. Now, this is something that since I've gotten in office, right, anytime they file a law that impacts Harris County and I have good grounds to sue, I'm suing because I think it's important that we realize that over time, Democrats, I think, have gotten worn down, right? We like to think that everybody's better angels will win the arguments in their mind. We think that we can collaborate with conspirators. We think that if we just continue reaching across the aisle, then they'll work with us, right? If we just be nicer, they will give us voting rights. That's not how major movements have happened in this country, right? Thurgood Marshall was not asking permission. Folks who marched in the street in Selma were not asking permission. And I view part of my role as the young Democratic elected official to be prepared for a fight. And so anytime there's an opportunity for us to preserve elections, for us to preserve democracy, there's a fight. Just this week, several lawyers on my team and I were in Austin on the initial hearing in that case. We argued before the judge, and we expect an initial decision on that case tomorrow. But I think it's important to note that the Texas legislature under Republican leadership, they're not even hiding the ball anymore, right? They're not now coming out and saying, oh, we're going to pass this law that we know is going to impact our most diverse county, but we're not going to call it that. No, they're passing laws now that don't even apply to the entire state of Texas, that apply just to Harris County. But the good news is my team is whip smart. We get up in the morning to work out. We eat our Wheaties, and we're prepared for a fight with Ken Paxton, Greg Abbott, Donald Trump, or whoever else may bring it.
Man, I needed to hear that. And I think a lot of people who are watching and listening to you right now needed to hear that, because again, we can become overly consumed with how dark the skies are and how bad this looks for democracy, for the people of Harris County. And again, by extension, given the importance of that county's role in this state, in this country, for all of us, wherever you live in America. But then this conversation reminds me that you're on point and you're taking this on. And the team that you lead, the people who support you and are behind you, the folks that you're fighting for really have a shot in this, but we can't give in and we can't give up. And I love you mentioning Thurgood Marshall and other leaders in the civil and voting rights fights of the 50s and the 60s and the generations before that. 100 years ago, the Texas legislature, then controlled by Democrats, outlawed voting by African Americans in the state of Texas. And they didn't even try to do it euphemistically, as the state legislature is doing with Harris County right now, saying, you know, a county of more than 4 million that meets these criteria. We know what they're talking about. But back then, they literally spelled it out, and it took 21 years for those in the fight to overturn that decision and win justice at the highest court in the land. And another 21 years after that to compel President Johnson, the first Texas president, to pass and sign the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This stuff takes time, but we'll never get there if we give in or give up or throw in the towel or accept defeat. And I love what you just said about this idea that we can collaborate with these co-conspirators in this effort to overthrow our democracy, and somehow that will make it okay. I'm all about bipartisanship, working across the aisle where we have common goals, common interests, and can do the common good. But when someone literally wants to destroy and dismantle your democracy, take away your right to vote, there is zero common ground right there. And we must fight them with everything that we have. And again, for those just joining, that's why I've asked Christian Menefee, who is the county attorney, the elected position in Harris County that is fighting for our democracy. Again, not just for the 5 million plus who live in Harris County, but for all of us everywhere in the United States at this critical moment where our democracy is under attack almost everywhere, but there's almost no place like Harris County where that attack has been concentrated the way it is right now. Christian, do you have any final thoughts for people who are inspired by the example of leadership that you set right now and want to know what they can do? They may live in Harris County, they may live here in El Paso, they may live in some other part of Texas or in America, but they want to get behind you and they want to help. What can they do to support this effort?
A few things. You know, I remember very vividly in 2016 when Donald Trump won the election, and the first thing that I asked myself is, yeah, you're pissed, yeah, you're upset, but what have you done, right? And I thought about all the work that my parents did to preserve our democracy. And I thought about the people in my life who were actively making sacrifice to keep America what it was. And in that moment, I realized, Beto, that I hadn't been doing much of anything, right? And just doing something incrementally more than what I was doing was part of a major transition that got me to where I am today. So to the folks watching, sign up to register other folks to vote, right? And not just before election season, but year round. Find one person who is in a local office and support them. You know, one of the things I've learned from being in local office is we often talk about the presidency of the United States, we talk about the United States Senate, but it's a principle in both parties that the folks who are closest to your doorstep, right, are able to most impact your life on a day-to-day. There are local officials who are on the front lines every single day across our country, whether it be Kim Foxx out in Cook County, right, or Brandon Johnson out there, or Karen Bass out in LA, the mayor. These folks are on the front lines of many of the fights to preserve our democracy. So find one of these folks and support them. Obviously, I'm a local official, so, you know, would love your support, but, you know, send them $20, right? Help register voters year round and start to get involved in the local political process, because you kind of alluded to this earlier, Beto. In the state of Texas, I firmly believe that Republicans have recognized the importance of Harris County. One of the individuals who lost her election last year, who filed a lawsuit to overturn the results of that election, said it very clearly. As Harris County goes, the state of Texas could go. And as the state of Texas goes, the nation could go. Just consider the impact. If Democrats won the state of Texas in the presidential contest, there are many states where you wouldn't even have to see how they voted because the game would be over. I firmly believe that the path to making that happen is through this increasingly diverse set of counties in the state of Texas. And the good news is not only are these counties becoming more diverse, not only are they voting more Democratic, but they are electing dope-ass leaders who are standing on the front lines to protect our democracy and ensure that 20 years from now, we're closer to a more perfect union than we are today. So register folks to vote. Support those in local office. And I guarantee that of the people who are on this live right now, there's one person on here who in 5 years, you could be filing your own lawsuit against Greg Abbott, right? Run for office. I tell young people all the time, because one of the things about my race when I first ran, I unseated a 12-year incumbent, and I didn't announce a single elected official endorsement when I did it. And people always say, like, oh, didn't you hear, wait your turn? we can't have that attitude. You know, just think about the great people from the civil rights movement in this country. Not a single one of like the major figures, right? Or the vast majority of them were under the age of 30. These were young people who were vigorous, who were vibrant, who were not afraid of a fight, who weren't worried about where their career was going to be in 20 years, right? We need more young people getting involved in public office, getting involved in campaigns, so that we can keep this fire in protecting our democracy. My last point, Beto, is in this job as the lawyer for county government, my clients are more than 60 elected officials throughout the county. These are folks who are Democratic, Republican, doesn't matter. I'm their lawyer. If they have a goal that they want to accomplish as their lawyer, I tell them what's legal and I help them accomplish it. There are many times where we reach across the aisle and you help out folks because they're doing something that's in the interest of good for our community. But just as you mentioned, Beto, when people are trying to overturn the results of election, when people are trying to undermine our democracy, when people are placing rules on elections that are for no reason other than to keep people who look like me from voting, that there is no meeting halfway, right? There is no backing down. That requires us being in the street. That requires us being in the courtroom. That requires us putting up a fight. And my commitment to not just the people in Harris County, but each and every person who's watching this live is you can bet every single dollar in your bank account that I will be there for every single fight to protect our democracy.
This is the front lines of this fight to protect the right to vote that we both described how hard won it was. People gave their lives, literally died fighting so that we could freely and fairly choose the elected leaders who could guide our community, our state, our country in the direction that we've agreed on. The genius of this country is that all of us can find a way to come together peacefully, democratically, and move forward. And that genius is under attack unlike any time since the era of Jim Crow, perhaps unlike any time since the Civil War that literally tore this country apart, and only very precariously was it brought back together. And Christian mentioned, you know, for some that Civil War is still being fought, still taking place right now. So if this matters to you, and I think it does, or you wouldn't be watching, please follow Christian Menefee here on Instagram, on Twitter. He is literally fighting this for all of us right now. These cases are in trial right now that will determine whether people will really have this right to vote and what kind of precedent will be set for the rest of us in Texas, the rest of us in the United States. You've given us reason to be hopeful, to be optimistic, and to be inspired to stay in this fight. I hope that you'll agree to come back and join us on Instagram as these cases progress, as they conclude, because they're important in their own right. But again, part of the reason I wanted to introduce you to so many of those that I've gotten to know on Instagram is that I think you are so exciting in terms of what you're doing right now and what you're going to continue to do for all of us here in Texas. And I want everyone to be able to get to know you, to see that and get behind you. So thank you for the fight you're leading. Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again, I hope, very soon.
I appreciate it, Beto. Thanks you again for the invite.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you again very soon. Again, Christian Menefee. Adios.